cap on it so that I could come back to it later. And once it got down to the right temperature, it's not a bad chocolate stout for $2. And I said, oh yeah, so I was there and I bought 4 of them. And then the guy was like, oh, you like your chocolate stout? We ought to try this thing too. So I bought one of those as well. Trader Joe's. How did we live without it? It's odd though that they don't have one closer to campus. I really need one. In Tucson, Arizona, they have 4 Trader Joe's. One's north, one's east, one's west, and one's central. And in the southern part of town, South Tucson, they have some really good Mexican food.
Question producer is on mute.
Well, I mean, it's diminishing returns, or something like that. I mean, it's an exponential decline in the number of questions.
I'm going through vocab now to find if there's anything I'm confused on, but I've run out of confusion.
That's a good problem.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, this session worked out well so far as I was concerned.
So are you a D professor? Can you be able to be a doctoral?
Yeah. Although initially when I came here I wasn't, but and I mean it was strange because I was told, oh, I can have grad students, but I wasn't actually. I guess my predecessor didn't have that privilege, and so I wasn't given it automatically. But yeah, in the first 2 or 3 years I was given. So I'm occasionally sitting on doctoral as the person who, the grad student rep on the exams. But I've had one grad student, a master's student, and ultimately he was a non-thesis master. So I guess I was on his. I guess I can't technically say he was my grad student. I graduated him, but I was on his regular ordinary exam that he had to take when he had finished.
How do you have a non-thesis master's? Like in that realm, anyway. I mean,
Yeah, well, I guess you take a lot of classes, and you have to take more classes than you have a thesis semesters. And I think he did write something up, but it wasn't really a thesis.
I know they're like clinical. It's like PAs don't have to write a thesis.
But it's a graduate degree.
Yeah.
But it's a professional degree, really, right?
Yeah. A lot of them make you write, do like a larger research project your second year now, but nothing to the extent of a thesis.
You haven't read a thesis? I didn't write 100 pages.
My thesis, my PhD, my doctoral dissertation was like 350 pages.
I don't know anything about anything.
If you can write about it that long.
You should see the opening paragraph to my NSF proposal. It had like 12 citations in the first 3 sentences.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Because I write really super dense.
Right. So I was talking to actually somebody who was at the University of Arizona, who I sort of know, who was saying that somebody else wanted to write a book with him, and that the other guy sat down and wrote page after page after page after page, and he invested like 2 or 3 days and he wrote 1 paragraph. And no, at that rate you're not going to write a book.
Maybe do it on the back of a napkin. The whole.
But these days there are short.
Diagram on the other side.
Here's what I know.
But these days there are short dissertations. I mean, it's not that weird to have a 30-page dissertation or something like that. I don't know about your department,
I don't know.
but, I mean, length is not something that many departments demand in a thesis. In fact, they seem to prefer, shorter theses. I was in a department where they would prefer shorter theses, but I.
You're a very loquacious person, so.
Yeah.
It's the second time I've heard that word used. It's just not a word that you hear.
Sorry.
No, it's not a big deal. It's just like, you just don't hear that word twice in a day.
Sorry, I just want to confuse my undergraduate students with words. You guys don't know what that word means, do you? No.
You do a vocabulary lesson at the end of all your
Yeah.
sessions. So this is what this meant.
I get bonus points if it's not actually a science word, it's just a regular vocab word. Science words is easy to triple.
One of the faculty members in my department at the meeting yesterday, who was a non-English speaker, was apparently back in, I don't know if her country of origin, but the place where they speak the same language as her, and she said that she cannot talk about science in her native language.
It would be really hard. I had a student this semester who's from China, and I would get his papers, and he'd have all these notes because he'd be on his cell phone looking up like a scientific word, and because it's not something you learn. So if you came over here and learned the science words, you wouldn't necessarily know your indigenous.
Your
word.
original, yes.
That was,
There's got to be some kind of horizontal gene transfer analogy.
I've seen diagrams from like Germany and stuff where the diagram is in English, and I'm not sure if they like take it from an English source or, but it'll be on like a German website. The diagram will be in English, but then the whole website in German. So I mean, maybe there's.
in Germany though, now they teach English immediately.
Yeah, they're impressive.
Don't ever play multilingual Scrabble with a German person.
That's worth putting somewhere where it has, it can be seen more.
It's fun to try, but when they speak Russian, German, French, Italian, Spanish, and English, you lose.
You're screwed.
They don't even have to be honest. They can just be like, this is a word.
Just trust me.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that we simply, in fact, there are horizontal gene transfers analogy. I mean, we just don't have access to the source, I mean, the material in this country. We have to work at it, and therefore the transfer event tends not to occur.
It's beyond the zone of paralysis, it's just too far.
Well, no. It's not an evolutionary problem. It's an ecological problem. We're not found in the same environment, literally, as these agents to be transferred existed. And so, because we're not exposed to it, the likelihood of the transfer simply is much less. It just doesn't, there's no way it happens naturally in this country unless you're in a specific micro-environment in which a language other than English is used.
If you want to travel to another country, I mean, another non-English speaking country, other than the Spanish speaking country, it's thousands of dollars. But if I'm in Germany and I want to go to Paris for the weekend, it's like
doable.
it's literally like a train ticket, and because their EU passport will get them anyway. So.
And there are a number of countries, is Switzerland one of them, that have multiple languages? I know Belgium is one of them where they
Yeah,
speak.
Switzerland's like divided into fours too, because there's actually a section in Switzerland that still speaks Latin, like original Latin. It's not very many people, it's like 600 people, but it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I love languages. Don't ask me to speak anything but English. One of the nice things about this crazy website I'm putting together is that it gives me an opportunity, just because I want to put words down on paper on the screen, to look up where these words came from. And that's a good analogy, or maybe not analogy, in fact it's a homology, right? The noto root. Literal homology. Identical by descent.
All right,
Yes!
I got one.
Stall moment.
Could you just kind of explain emergent properties?
God, no. So the problem with emergent properties is that to a degree it's a sort of made-up idea that really exists more within the culture of science than it does in reality. But nonetheless, it's a useful idea. So I actually wrote a paper on, which is published on emergent properties. This is with regard to phage therapy. In fact, I think it's called Phage Therapy Emergent Property Pharmacology. And so in pharmacology, you don't see it in many papers, but you see this word emergent property used occasionally. And what it means to a pharmacologist is that you've got this chemical and you can characterize it however you want, but you're never going to really know what the impact is going to be on whatever you're treating, the animal, the human, especially in terms of side effects, until you actually put it into the individual. And so what that means is that there is no way within the context of the level of understanding that we have that you can look at this chemical and predict that it's going to have this side effect. Now, if we knew everything, I mean, if we knew everything about physiology and we knew everything about the chemistry of the compound, we really could say, okay, this compound is going to have this property when we put it in. And in fact, to a degree, we can predict, based upon the chemical structure, what the potential side effects or other kinds of properties are going to be. But the truth is, within our limited understanding of biology, it's just really difficult to say, starting with our lower level understanding, to predict higher level understandings. And that's really what emergent properties are. They're something where you look at the lower level and you can't translate that into higher level understanding. And with phage therapy, the argument we were making, although it took us some time to figure out that this was the argument we were making, is that phages are, as actually quote-unquote living organisms, or at least replicating entities, are really, 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 really complex. And so you should say, oh, therefore we don't know much about them, because inherently you can't, because there's so much to know. And yet you would expect, therefore, that they would have greater numbers of emergent properties when you put them into an individual, but in fact they've got fewer numbers of emergent properties compared to some relatively simple chemical when you put it into an individual. So you have to ask the question, well, why is that? And the answer is that these are evolved entities, and evolution, this has actually got a microbial evolution answer to it. Evolution assures that organisms more or less just are good at doing what they need to do, and they don't evolve abilities to do stuff that they don't need to do. So phages have been shaped by evolution to be exquisitely good at hurting, or at least utilizing, exploiting bacteria, and they're really bad at just about everything else. And so when you put a phage inside of you, other than the fact that they consist of proteins, they really don't have a great potential to do you harm. So despite the fact that they're hugely complex, they have fewer emergent properties in a pharmacological sense than do just simple chemicals.
Theoretically, if we, let's say in the future, we start treating all these bacterial infections that we have, let's say we can manufacture phages that can treat these bacterial infections because we've ran out of drugs to do it with. Either way, but anyway, let's say we keep doing that. Is there any use? Is it possible for the phages to then evolve to have some sort of functionality to attack our bodies, or are they so evolutionarily attuned that they just don't have the capacity to do that?
Yeah, so that's got a great microbial evolution answer as well. So how do you prevent microorganisms from evolving?
Freeze them, not.
Well, that's kind of part of the answer, but what are you avoiding by freezing them?
Their ability to mutate and transfer.
And
information.
in what context do mutations occur?
In large populations?
Well, yeah, that's part of the answer. That's part of the answer. Yeah, it's what mutations in large populations and together give you effective natural selection.
Oh, all right.
So this is serial passage. So how do you end up with something evolving into something else? You subject it to serial passage. So, I mean, the easy way in which you would expect a phage to pull off that trick is actually via horizontal gene transfer, because it can pick up genes from whatever it's infecting, and then potentially those genes could be bacterial virulence factors. And in fact, that's something that people are concerned about in terms of phage therapy.
If it didn't have the ability to transfer it to our cells anyway, it wouldn't matter if it picked up a virulence factor or not.
Well, no, it's not. It's picking up virulence factors and transferring them to other bacteria and then turning those other bacteria into bacterial pathogens as a consequence. But the thing is that when you're doing phage therapy, you're not adding the phages to the system and then anticipating that those phages are going to spend years propagating within that system and thereby potentially evolving into something nasty. Instead, you're hitting the patient. The replication of those phages is going on in a different location under controlled conditions, ideally made in such a way that you're maintaining the phage's genetic integrity fairly effectively. And then you're just taking a sample of that and you're adding it for a relatively short period of time to the bacteria and hopefully killing off the bacteria. But the potential for the phages to evolve in that situation is not really high. And the flip side to that is that a number of authors argue that phages are that one good thing about phages as an antibacterial is that they do evolve. But in fact, the opportunity for them to evolve in such a way that they potentially can become a better antibacterial in the course of the treatment is relatively low, in part because it's short and also in part because of spatial structure. If you happen to have a phage in this part of the body that has evolved into something that is a more effective killer of whatever bacteria you're treating, such as it can, if a bacteria mutates to phage resistance, you can have a phage that mutates to overcoming that resistance. But if the phage that evolves, that's the better phage, is in this part of the body, and for example, resistant bacteria are evolving in this part of the body, getting the two together is not highly likely. And the phages are not necessarily going to be in high densities, high numbers, wherever they evolve, the new improved phages. And the bacteria that could propagate them are not necessarily going to be in high density wherever they're located. And as a consequence, the potential to increase the phage population numbers to the point where the phages actually could do some good as an antibacterial within the individual is relative as well. So this is combining ecological with evolutionary ideas. So are you satisfied with my emergent property answer?
Yeah.
It really is just kind of made up, not really biological idea, but people present it as something that's profoundly biological. It's really just our ignorance that's talking. Took me a long time to figure that out. I had to write a paper on it before I said, wait a minute.
So you are what you eat question.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily related to the exam. So I got an argument with somebody about GMOs, and he started citing papers that said that humans are incorporating the DNA of our food into our genome.
Well, I wouldn't.
And these were interesting papers because they were showing that indeed, like, intestinal wall cells had DNA from food in them.
Yeah, I wouldn't categorically reject that possibility,
Okay.
but I would say that it's not just GMO DNA, it's everything we're exposed to in terms of DNA, and there's a whole lot of different things of DNA that we're exposed to. And, you know, in this case, what makes these genes, you know, really any different from any other kind of genes, any other kind of DNA we're exposed to? And the second thing is that, okay, it's relatively easy to get this DNA into our cells, but the hard part is getting the DNA into our germline. I mean, that's sequestered and...
Kind of what I fell back on this. It's not like you're going to get it where you pass it on. It's not, even if you get it in a few cells, I mean, statistically, it's not going to make it into the DNA of that cell. Even if it does, it's not probably going to be expressed. And even if it is, it's only a very, very small number of your cells overall. But.
And even if it makes it into our germline, so what? I mean, if it does anything, it's probably going to make the resulting zygote inviable, or maybe the egg or the sperm inviable. And if it does good,
Or resistant to Agent Orange or something.
or whatever those phosphate, the Roundup herbicides. That's in a lot of stuff. Yeah, so I mean, my big problem with GMO, and you can go back and tell this, or these individuals this, is that you have a big multinational company typically that is deciding what kind of crops are going to be propagated based, or what strains are going to be propagated based upon whether or not they've made it into GMO. So they're really having a potentially profound effect on the quality or the diversity of our food supply, which I don't like. Because when you cut down on anything you do that cuts down on diversity is cutting down on our long-term fitness.
I think I got 2 more.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't expecting that. That's wonderful.
But then that's it.
Okay, that's fine. We're certainly not asking you to come up with more.
Mutual policing is just like barrier cells and like your epithelium. Is that just a good example?
Well, no, actually, within the context of our bodies as a population of cells, if you had all of the cells responsible for looking out for cheaters and in some way inactivating them or reducing their potency, that would be mutual policing. And to some degree our cells do that, because if our cells become infected with a virus, they can contribute to their own apoptosis. And therefore get rid of themselves. So that is mutual policing. It's when you have a population and you have individuals within that population, and all of the individuals are responsible for protecting the population from cheaters, rather than specialized individuals within the population that are responsible for it. And it's I mean, having specialized individuals is simply a greater level of sophistication. It's just a way of setting things up so that you can have cells that are only responsible for the policing, rather than having to be responsible for policing and doing something else so they can be better at policing. So if you have a population of individuals, a herd or something like that, if you're going to have each individual responsible for punishing the cheaters, that would be mutual policing. I guess you see that in primates, really. When a primate becomes real nasty, you know, they'll tend to get ganged up Alternatively, you could have just, if you had a herd where you had a single male, for example, if they were the only ones that were basically protecting the herd and watching out for cheaters, that would be something different from control policing. You see that term actually in the Hymenoptera social biology literature, where you've got bees or whatever that are beating up other bees. For example, if a bee tries to reproduce on its own, it's not the queen, you could have the other bees punishing that bee or preventing it from being able to successfully reproduce. And that would be an example of mutual policing. We're going on that you have two here.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out
how to ask the question.
Well, can you just differentiate that with self-policing?
Maybe not.
Is it just that they don't have to be specialized? Or, I mean, they can be specialized in self-policing.
Oh, wait a minute, no. How, do you have a definition for that term there?
Interference with defection behaviors within a population as mediated by would-be cheaters themselves.
Yeah, so self-policing in the cancer example is where you've got these cells that have a number of different mechanisms within themselves that serve to prevent the cell from turning into a cancer cell. So you've got all of these oncogenes, for example, and if there's a mutation in it. One of the ways that the oncogenes work is in a normal cell, the normal gene rather, is by interfering with the ability of that cell to transform if it happens to get a mutation. So that's an example of self-policing. You are preventing yourself from turning into a cheater. You have some kind of means that's increasing your individual restraint that has nothing to do with the actions of the individuals around you. Whereas mutual policing, you have the actions of the individuals around you that are enforcing the cooperative behavior. It's cool stuff. And the question, I believe, that's associated with that is that when the problem with self-policing is that you are more, if you rely too much on it, you are more vulnerable to invasion by cheaters. Because if all of your anti-cheating mechanisms are directed inward, you aren't going to have mechanisms that you can direct outward. And so our bodies not only have all of these genes that are responsible for interfering with transformation into cancer cells, but we also have an immune system that takes care of cheating that occurs outside of the immune system cells themselves, the policing. It's a separation of the cheater from the policer, rather than the cheater and the policer being the same individuals. If police, I guess police was a word. one that polices. That's it.
That's it. Good.
So you need to remind me about pickles and eggs.
Pickles and eggs. I will do.
And we also have chicken eggs. And they're from bantam chickens. They're little tiny chickens. And those eggs are about that big. Are you interested in those as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, and you're talking about eggs that are raw eggs. I mean, just regular, ordinary eggs that you can then cook with.
Yeah.
As opposed to hard-boiled eggs.
Yeah.
Okay, we can do this.
Okay.
Right now we have 36 or so eggs.
Have you ever hard-boiled the little one?
I have not done that yet. We've only
Pickle
had
the
the,
eggs.
what was
You
that?
should pickle the
Yeah,
eggs.
pickled eggs and beets.
It's not a bad idea. Well, it's not going to happen over the next week and a half. No, we've only had the little chicken eggs for the past 2 weeks or so because my daughter got some 4 bantams that she was hoping were all hens, and it turned out to be all hens. Sometime I think this summer, and they've now started laying just recently. We also have a hen that has been crowing. Happened yesterday morning.
Interesting.
Yeah. We're like, what's going on? We'd hear we have the rooster and the hen living in our basement. And so we'd have the rooster going off doing its crowing, and then it'd be followed by this just weird thing. And it was every time he would do his crowing, and then immediately, almost as though he were doing it, it was followed by this weird thing, as though there was something wrong with him. But it turned out that it was the hen that was doing the crowing. The hen's like 8 years old, so. And it doesn't do it every day. What was that?
Getting senile, is it?
Yeah, it's forgetting that she is forgetting that she's a hen. Okay? So email me, obviously, with any other questions. And the basic idea is that the vocabulary, it's simply give me a definition that I'll buy is a definition of that term. The in-text questions, I mean, they're there supposedly with the answers found in the same section above it. And obviously I've been answering what these are all about. And then the other questions are questions that are more general than that. They're not going to be Picayune, they're not going to be just the Picayune details that that are found in the lectures. They're going to be broader than that, trying to get you to show me not only that you've got a broad understanding, but perhaps also that you can provide me with connections between the different ideas that are presented. Again, I don't want to call it an essay, because an essay, I think, is a more formal thing than what I'm looking for. I'm really looking for you to just take the information that you know and put it down onto paper in a moderately compelling way, but really I'm just looking for a level of understanding. And then I'm comparing the different essays. Not for all of them. There are essays that I got last time that I did not need to compare with the other essays in order to provide a grade, because there really wasn't much there. But I mean, I'm getting answers that really cover everything that I would expect to be covered, and it's obvious to me that that's a good essay that requires full credit. And then as I go through the other essays, I try to get a sense of how close those essays came to that mark. And obviously there's half credit, or not half credit, sorry, partial credit all over. Okay?
Okay.
Rock and roll? Rock and roll.
Rock
See
on.
you.
Party on, Wayne.
Exactly. So see you December 3rd, Tuesday at 5:30 in 609. Okay. Hopefully, we have that. Yes, it's still running. And I am